Well, how are you? Great. Oh, come on, you people. We're here doing the work. You're supposed to participate. So how are you? Great. Excellent. And for those that are in camera as well. So I'm delighted to be here to present this illustrious panel to talk about the impact of the CEO-CMO relationship. And I brought in a panel of luminaries that actually looks more like an audition crew for the next James Bond movie. Instead of Daniel Craig, we have a very diverse group of highly talented and beautiful people. So first I want to introduce Colleen DeCourcy, who until very recently was the president and co-CEO of Wyden & Kennedy. She's a luminary in the advertising business. She will be inducted as a Lion of Saint Mark at Cannes. Only 8 people in the world have ever received that title. So, Colleen. Then I have my friend Diego Scotti, who is the Executive Vice President and CMO of Verizon. He has ample marketing experience, raised in Argentina, but has held amazing marketing jobs in Amex, in Vogue, in JP Crew, and now for the last almost 10 years at Verizon. Diego. And now my also friend, Kofi, who is the CMO of DoorDash. He's been there for 3 years. Kofi and I worked together at Facebook. He decided to leave Facebook the day that I told him that maybe he was the candidate to replace me as CMO. That was the moment that he said, it's time for me to leave. And since then, he's been doing amazing as one of the fastest growing companies in the space. Kofi. Anyway, this is great because it's a conversation among friends. We've known each other for quite a while, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the extraordinary of each other. But let me start with you, Diego. Right now, the marketing function gets a really negative rap. Every year, Spencer Stuart, who is a partner of Yale, reports on the tenure of the CMO getting shorter and shorter. The AMA just talked about every couple of years, the death of the CMO. Yet there's a group of people within the industry leading some really impressive companies, like the 3 that we have here, that not only have kept the title of CMO, but that they have earned in influence, becoming a true advisor to the CEO. I think when I think about those models, you come to mind. You've earned a level of influence and impact in the company beyond most people that I know, and I just wanted to know how that's done.
Thank you. Well, I wish I had the recipe, because that would be my book then. It's like I can do a book. I just share a few of the things that for me are observations during the last almost 30 years of my career. But I think what's happening is not I would say like the elimination of the CMO role as a role, but a true redefinition of what it means. I don't know. I haven't found a better title, so that's why I'm not tinkering with my title, because I think it's kind of like okay, it's good, But my job has changed a lot, and I think the one of the reasons why I think we're seeing the pressure right now with still the tenure of CMOs is because obviously there's a lot of pressure to create results, etc. But I think it's the understanding of a lot of CMOs that they are marketing people first as opposed to business people first. And this is a conversation that you and I always have. And I think that's been always very, very present in my mind, because it really sets you up in terms of the paradigm that you think about when we need to run a brand like, in this case, Verizon. Yes, the advertising and the brand, all of that is great, but when you think about everything that goes in between, not only to drive demand, but then the experience for the customer, it's really a core redefinition of the CMO role. The other 2 things that are important is, for me, I always think about myself as a Swiss Army knife or an Argentinian army knife. if there's such a thing. Because I think there's no thing that I don't say yes in terms of like what my CEO needs me to do, you know. Sometimes I'm leading from the front, sometimes I'm leading from the back, sometimes I'm operating in the shadows, sometimes, you know, I have different roles, but my CEO trusts me to get things done, and that's a key core component of being you know, a good CMO as well. And then the third piece is the complexity of the business. You know, right now, you know, we did a few years ago things like we decided to put all under the CMO team, not only the consumer communications, but all of the stakeholders communications, employees, investors, and press and PR and public relations in general, all reports onto me, just to give you an example of, so then our ability to influence the narrative of the company overall is significant, you know. So some of the things are structural as well, and we can talk more, but those three things, at least to start, I think are important.
Excellent. And Kofi, in your case, I met you as an advertising guy. You worked in advertising in Ghana, in London, in the United States, with some of the, including Wyden, by the way, only a year and a half, but you have them, and yet you made the transition into the business chair in a startup, which is tech and founder-led. How is it done?
It's a great question. I think a lot of the themes that Diego shared are relevant for me as well. Like, I think one of the things that you said to me, Antonio, when we first met, was this notion that the job is to be a business person, not a marketing artisan. And it's something I've always believed. Like, I think of marketing and advertising and creativity all as inputs. They're a means to an end, right? And the end is like, are we driving business outcomes? And so I think for me, being able to have that mindset of like, our job here is to solve problems and to bring that to any company and figure out like, what are the most pressing business problems that we can solve? And to use Diego's example of like, there's things that my team does that would not qualify as marketing in any other company. So one of the big constituents that we serve at DoorDash is our Dashers, which is the people that make the deliveries. My team owns the entire operations pipeline for that, which is how does a Dasher get their bag and how do they get the red card that they used to pay for things? And when the pandemic happened, we actually became the largest procurer of PPE in the United States because we have a Dasher fleet of millions of Dashers, and the marketing team went and figured out the supply chain for getting personal protective equipment and then giving that to Dashers. So it's really about figuring out like, what are the problems and not being like, that's not marketing's job, but like, what can we do in this moment to like move the business forward?
That's great. Colleen, you've worked with some of the best CMOs in the world, big companies, mid-sized company, startups. You're also been a president of a company, and I've also seen you exert an incredible amount of influence on CEOs. Airbnb, for example, with Brian Chesky directly and personally. In what way do successful CMOs work their influence within the context of the CEO?
You know, it's a funny thing because every CEO is their own unique beast. I think that founders particularly, and I think that Valley founders profoundly, because they have thought something into existence that didn't exist before, and therefore, like, what can they not think of and know? And I find, honestly, when a CMO can hold a narrative that brings that CEO road in front of them to keep inventing, to keep changing, to keep growing, and a place to come back to, when that trust is there, that's an unbreakable bond, and it's a beautiful bond to be part of as a creative person. Also as the president of an agency, you know, when you watch that happen, you know there is unlimited road, because I think in the same way that marketing can't be separate from business, I don't think creativity can be separate from business. When you bring those things to bear to a CEO, and they will when you can wrest that narrative from their hands and continue to tell that story and inspire them to build more, I think that's an unbreakable bond. I think you've been very, very good with that. That company has transformed.
Well, especially during, I mean, the world is, and I know that I need to say that to you guys, but the world is such a crazy place that everything has accelerated to a point that what was true last week is not true anymore now. 2 months ago, like the strategies in big companies are in flux because the world is in flux. So to what Colleen was saying, being able to make sense of this chaos and dynamism, not always bad, but it's just very dynamic, to be kind with the process. It requires a huge degree of commitment, conviction, and clarity, especially when you think about the narrative of the brand, the narrative of the CEO. I've seen like my relationship with Hans. That is actually, I mean, I was hired by the previous CEO, and you know, it's just my relationship with Hans, the new CEO, has only accelerated all the work that we've been doing. But I see like the tougher it gets, the more complex it gets, the more unclear it gets, the more he relies on me and on marketing, because like the ability to hold that narrative, together. And the narrative, I don't mean just what we said externally, but like the way we think about ourselves and how everything that we're doing fits into that.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd add is like in a chaotic, like uncertain environment, marketing has the opportunity and potentially the responsibility to actually sort the signal from the noise. So there's so much happening in the world, and as business leaders, and all of you will be familiar with this, the people in our businesses are all siloed and focused on like their piece of the pie. But when everything's changing around you, how do you actually figure out like what do customers want from this company in this moment, to your point, this week? How might that be different next week, and how do we adjust to that? And marketing has the opportunity to bring that customer voice in a crazy time to the business and help guide the business.
Mm-hmm. Well, just to bring it full circle, you mentioned Airbnb and Brian Chesky. He had been so focused as a CEO on building a business that was about convincing people that it wasn't weird to stay in someone else's home, that he had lost sight of the fact that one of the things damaging his business was there was more demand than supply. And so first you have to wrap your arms around the hosts. And we started a program called In Hosts We Trust, and told him a story about building a world where hosts were the ultimate puller together of different things, that they made the difference in a community. And then talked about the fact that all of his customers were coastal elites, basically, and that you needed to speak to the middle of the country, and that your values had to lead you, but just a value wasn't a business proposition. And he was a brilliant guy. He just needed someone to tell him a story that brought out that inventor in him again, that would solve that other problem, to your point.
Yeah, you were seeing these three amazing professionals telling a story as if it was easy. It's really when each and every one of you is saying that the key is to be a business person first, a marketing artisan second, to be able to solve problems, and that those problems are business problems, not communication problems, that you have to be involved in strategy, because what you describe is a fundamental reshaping of the Airbnb strategy that at previous time was what we're open for everyone. It was almost social good. When you're in the consumer good world, which all of you came from, that is easy because the marketing function has earned its seat at the table. The questions in the CPG world is whether the CMO is good or not. And if the CMO is not good, the CMO is replaced and someone earns the chair. Outside of the CPG world, the technology world that you guys are all familiar with, actually you've been able to navigate both of them, it is not a normal role for marketing to play. Sometimes you're not even invited to the meetings to solve problems, to exert your influence, or also to change strategy. The three of you have done it. How do you do it when it is not the natural space of the marketing function?
Who wants to start? You
No,
start.
I started. Listen, there is and I've just used my example of the two CEOs that I had to serve for at Verizon. Very different people, and I would say like listen, who the CEO is, to Colleen's point about like it's very important, because it will set the tone for like what the expectation is from marketing, if they are smart and if they understand. The previous CEO of Verizon was not my contemporary at all. He was a 64-year-old engineer, ex-military, didn't know anything about marketing or had anything to relate to me whatsoever when I joined Verizon. He said, I don't know anything about this, but I know one thing: if we don't change, we die. So I need you to help me to take the company. You're gonna be shot from the time that you arrive to the company. So you're gonna need to stick to what we're gonna do, but then I'm gonna give you the air cover to do what you need to do. And that was my brief. I didn't need anything more. The second CEO came in and he was like, I still don't know anything about marketing, but I know where you're going, and actually we need to accelerate it. So I don't know. I hate to maybe I pulled myself down when I said like I've been at the right place at the right time with the right people. But the right people are the real people. People matter, And I've been fortunate in my life. I don't know if I searched them or they searched me or a combination of both. But we met in a place that I was able to do that. And the other thing I would say is, like Antonio, like to your point about not being easy. I think it's something that is underrated today. It's like persistence and sticking to it. Mm-hmm. And putting one foot in front of the other every day is kind of like, those are business qualities or leadership qualities. I don't know which ones, but that not everybody has it. Not everybody has it, and I think it makes a huge difference, especially when you are a CEO, like in big companies like Verizon, in which this guy wakes up every morning like, how I'm going to move this, transatlantic over the finish line. They need help. So.
Yeah, it's such a strange transition going between those worlds. So as someone who grew up in the advertising side of the business, as well as in, let's call it, slow-moving consumer goods like Bacardi, which is not a CPG but operates in the same way. Having the full domain expertise and having like unquestioned authority, where it's like, yes, of course the marketing person says this, and then turning up at a place like Facebook, which you and I both spend some time, which is like, what do you do? And why are you here? And how are you going to help us? And figuring out how to make that transition. One of the things that Antonio and I used to talk about at Facebook is when we welcome new marketing leaders to the organization, I would always give them a talk where I was like, you are a foreigner in a new place, and now your job is to learn how to speak the language. Like, what matters in this business is not what matters where you came from. I used to say to our creative teams at Facebook who reported to me that I was like, when I was at Whiten and Kennedy, it was enough to say, man, I think that shit is dope. Like that was the bar. Like, do I feel it's dope? That was good. That was good enough. But then you get into an environment where we're going to A/B test everything. We're going to understand the incrementality. We're going to understand whether it's actually performing at the standard. So being able to understand the currency of the organization that you're in and master that currency and deliver against that currency, for me, is the thing that I think has helped.
It was funny for me because I came out of high consideration purchase and late to CPG. I remember a very funny day with Mark Pritchard, and I because I had come at auto, tech, like high consideration things, and we were talking about Herbal Essence shampoo. And I was like, I just need to understand, like, what's the thing? He's like, there isn't a thing. Just make it up and be really compelling. I was like, what? This is amazing. And then you have to really get into what need are you filling in a person's life, and there's a complexity, a web that I learned, quite frankly, with his very gracious, prodding and laughing at me and helping me. One of the things that I think is very difficult outside of CPG is not only do you normally not have a product, you have an aversion to committing to a product. Because there is a pile of tech, or there is a pile of insights, or there's a pile of possibility of what you could do with your existing pipes that's different. And no one wants to block the imagination or the innovation of a company by putting a stake in the ground. Very famous recent pivot. But I see it all the time. And I think that can become a real block and a real problem. And so you have to figure out how to simplify, when it's non-CPG, a narrative that allows things to remain open while still allowing people to understand what it is you're trying to get them to commit to. And it's a double bind. It's a bit of a magic act. And I think if the CEO is not willing to have that balancing act, it's a really big problem. I think if they are, all the parts of your brain are firing at once, and it's the most fulfilling thing you could do, you know?
Yeah, one of the things that is really hard in tech environments is actually that you don't control all the parts of the ecosystem. So you and I had this challenge, which is like, it's one thing to own the narrative and drive the narrative and, you know, say like Facebook is about human connection. If, on the other hand, there's groups about hate speech on the platform, you have a problem, right? But these are things that, as a marketer, you may not have jurisdiction over how all of these various products are being built. So one of the things that we've tried to do at DoorDash is articulate a set of principles for the company that span outside the marketing function, so that every team inside the business is thinking about the end-to-end experience, not just through the local lens of like the product I'm building, but through the narrative lens of like, what do we want this company to be? And holding them accountable for delivering on that.
You mentioned, and I think it's spot on, of when someone from the CPG world comes into the tech world to see it as you're a foreign and there's a new language that you actually need to learn. I think over time, you and I learned this the hard way.
There is no easy way. I don't think.
There is no easy. No,
There's no Duolingo.
No.
There's no Duolingo. The thing is, you have to become bilingual and bicultural, which is you need to understand the business of language, you need to understand the culture of language, and then being able to translate so that when you're talking to someone like Colleen, that you're also able to keep the language required to inspire either great products or great experiences, and that's something that takes a while. The point that I wanted to touch upon is right now we are competing, particularly post-pandemic world, in something that Diego touched upon, which is it's no longer enough to be a preferred brand. You have to become a trusted brand. Preferred brands means that you're doing things within your category. Trusted brand means you need to do things within your category, but within the societal values that are relevant to your particular category. That brings what Diego was saying, multi-stakeholder engagement. So you need the employees first and foremost, you need your clients, you need your consumers, you need opinion leaders, and you need the government. Diego solved it structurally over time, I would imagine. How do you do it when you don't control those? Because you've had plenty of experiences, actually the three of you.
It is very difficult. I really, from my very core, believe that when brand is properly working, it is a series of guideposts that the whole company is performing against, no matter what they do, to your point, right? You set those rules. I think when you don't control the other pieces, if they're not aligning with your narrative, then the consumer can tell. And they can feel that. And so they'll like your commercial or they'll like your statement, but they're still not buying more of your product, which I think can be a real problem. As I can only bring my skills to bear, you know, I'm probably the only non-MBA businessy person. No? Yes.
MBA?
Yes.
Yeah, we're all not.
Yes.
Yeah, no, not
I had to learn
Get your
business
MBA.
on the fly.
We're not.
Yay, that makes me feel, God, guys, I've carried that
But
around
here you're
for my whole
teaching MBA.
career.
It's like something is good.
I've carried that shame for so long. But you learn it on the fly. And what you do realize is that there has to be a fundamental essence of why everyone is coming to work every day. And if you can tap into that enough, that your narrative that you're running is inspiring someone in product or making someone in ops proud to work at the company or lighting up the imagination of HR about the kinds of people they should be bringing in, I think that is the way. So you really have to, top from the bottom, you have to be influencing and inspiring is all you have left. And that is still very, very powerful.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
So fully agree with all of that. I think, you know, we at DoorDash are not structured the way that that Diego's team is, so we have to have a very tight relationship. So our comms and policy teams are run by a colleague of mine, Liz Jarvis-Sheen, who's terrific, but her and I are joined at the hip, right? So we have like a set of forums where we write the narrative together for a period. So we say, okay, the next year is going to be about X thing. Now, how do we bring that across the business into all the various teams? How do we make sure that as people are launching new products, they're framed through the lens of that narrative? How do we ensure that they're inspired by that narrative? The other thing that we've done, which has proved to be like a really useful tool, is like we actually built what we call a compass, and Antonio will be familiar with this because we tried to do this and didn't land it, but we landed it at DoorDash, which is like, what are a set of values, social values around which we want to operate the business? For us, that notion is that like DoorDash fundamentally provides access, like that's what this business does. So we want to optimize for like giving people more access, not less, and we want to create more opportunity for people. So that guides us in how we develop our products. So, you know, I'll use one example, which is we're building an ads product on the platform to allow like businesses to advertise. But it's the only ad product I know of that actually is goaling on conversions. It's not goaling on clicks, right? So like businesses only pay if someone makes a purchase. And we built it that way because local businesses like your little corner shop coffee place actually can't afford to invest in advertising if they don't know that it's going to have a return. So when you're building with the notion of like creating more access and creating more opportunity, you make different types of decisions. So it's like that type of narrative then starts to shape the stuff that we're actually building.
It's interesting because
You don't start it that way. You accumulate it over time, right?
And I think it's, to me, listen, I don't think it's easier on my company just because I own all the pieces, because you still have either people that don't believe or business units pressures and all of the stuff that we're talking here. So I think those things help significantly, but it's still, I might have 4 people in my team running those 4 areas and they still are disconnected. But there are 2 things that to me, I don't know, maybe this is helpful, but at least the way I think about it. One is the ROE, or my return on effort. I used to fight everything, you know, not in general, but in terms of like, how do I bring these things together and everything, and this little thing, you know, that's not consistent with the brand. It's like, and the reality is like, to use Colin's point, I mean, there are things that the customers feel more than others. There are things that are like, and you know, we need to pick those things that in terms of the return of effort to really bring them together and bring in consistent, it makes the most sense. That for some people, when I talked about this with my team, they think that, oh my God, it's like religion. You're like against religion. And then the other thing, and I tell you a little story, but it's like, I think we're also used to, in business, to think in boxes and compartments, right? That it has become a heresy to also think, not that think outside the box, but like maybe these things kind of like need to connect differently. So I talked a lot about Trojan horses because in a lot of these areas, like when we start talking about like parameters and strategies, and nobody listens.
Yep.
Nobody listens. So in some cases, I said we're going to work on these things that they're going to become Trojan horses to get us to a different way of working, but people are going to see it. So, for example, when and this was a very tense moment because when we had after the murder of George Floyd, I remember that Friday in which I was getting pummeled externally, internally, employees, my CEO. When are you going to put the statement? What are you going to say? Where is the press release? And this is kind of like one of the toughest weekends in my life because my career, because I said we're not going to put a statement. We're not going to put an Instagram stupid photo and minimize this thing. What we're going to do is we're going to have a CEO speaking to 135,000 employees at 9 a.m. on Monday, and he will talk about it. And that will be our press release. And my point about this is like we were doing something that was for one of the stakeholders that were the employees, but that became the narrative of the brand. And something that I wish I could, have planned is that my CEO broke into tears. I wish I could claim it like I asked him to do that, but he didn't. but my point is that I had. I'm not trying to minimize the point, but it was a very poignant moment because it was all of the authentic. I mean, that was so much more powerful than any ad, than any stupid Instagram post that I could have posted, and it was directed to employees, and it had the resonance that it had for all of the stakeholders. Was after that, I didn't have to explain anymore how these things were interconnected, and it became, one of those Trojan horses to help us. Set new strategies, new parameters.
Amazing story, actually. Related to that story and to some of the conversations that you guys have had, in my new role, I'm spending a lot of time with emerging leaders, some of Diego's people as well, and most of them are women and people of color, and there are 3 words that are coming up again and again and again and again, and it's relevant for MBA students, it's relevant for everyone. The negative connotation of 3 words: politics, power, and networking. And the conversation that we're having is, when you're a leader, if you cannot see politics with value, but as value neutral, politics should be nothing more than the way an organization gets things done within culture. Power, the accumulation of power, particularly for women and people, it's like, what do you mean accumulation of power? That's self-serving, that's not what I'm here to do. The moment that you reframe that to actually is about influence and impact, then it's okay to accumulate it. And the last piece is networking, which is, that's not my work. Yet, when I am listening to all your stories, your time with CMOs and CEOs, Diego's time aligning the organization, figuring those things out, your time with the head of policy, there are elements of politics, there are elements of power, and there are elements of network there. What should be the message that people should get out of those 3 magical words from your standpoint?
So I will say that I'm a pretty good example of what you described, which is like I struggle.
I did too.
I struggle with the notion of I'm uncomfortable wielding power. I don't actually like it. And so earlier on in my career, I actually shrank myself. We were talking about this a little bit outside. And it took me a long time to realize that wasn't doing me any service, and that I was actually being less effective as a result. And it would show up in all sorts of ways. So, I used to do this thing where I had a really hard time giving people tough feedback because I had a hard time wielding power. And one of my core values that I try to live by is around kindness. So it felt unkind to tell someone something that was hard for them to hear. And I had a coach who said to me once around these notions of power, she was like, by not telling people the truth, you're being unkind to them. And that framing in my mind really helped me sort of unlock, how do you step into the responsibility of the positions that you have, and how do you lean into understanding power as your ability to drive influence through an organization? How do you take the relationships that you build and the investment that you make in the relationships to actually get stuff done? Because all of us know that, to the point you made earlier, Diego, actually reporting lines don't matter as much as you think they would. particularly in companies that have like very powerful employee bases. Like, I had a very big team at Facebook, but I still had to influence them. I couldn't just tell them what to do because they're like very, very smart people who are very engaged and who have their own ideas and opinions. So understanding that investing in relationships and doing that from a place of, at least for me, genuine authenticity and engagement and a curiosity about people versus doing that in a transactional way. I think when people hear the word networking, it feels transactional. And so for me, it's about like not thinking of it as a transactional thing, but thinking of it as like, Colleen and I have a relationship now. So like when I'm going through something, I can pick up the phone and I can call Colleen. I can pick up the phone and I can call you. I can get advice from Diego. So like those relationships have value. So for me, it's really more about reframing those concepts because it took me a while to get my head around them.
I think it's a really interesting moment because we're seeing really the end of authority-based leadership. I was really trying to have a conversation about that with someone who has been a leader for a very long time and was bemoaning, kind of how this was really hard. And I was like, well, you know what, dude, like, who wants to be a boss during the French Revolution, Like, what are you hanging on to? It's good for you right now. Yeah, like, so I find that, like Kofi, I have a lot of trouble owning that and it held me back for a long time. When I was able to flip that on its head, I hate authority, so how could I be authority? I would just hate myself all day.
+1.
Right? Like, I'm like, what? I hate that guy. I'm not being that guy. But there is a way of working with people to help them self-actualize, and that's where I came to terms with feedback, networking, power. I had uncomfortable moments when I took over Wieden Kennedy because part of your job is to be that person. I never wanted to dance on tables for a company. It was just something I didn't feel good about. And so I would.
This is our job. It's great.
Sorry, I would take that light and try and channel it through myself to other people, and that was a form of power. And I think the job now is to create an essence of safety and trust. And that is very hard work. It involves a lot of your time. But if you give away your power, if you network one-to-one, if you use your authority to create space for other people, I think that works better. And that helps those of us that are not used to being in power, I think, step into roles where you feel like, oh, I'm abusing my ability to make a difference here. Mm-hmm. Just one quick thing, I remember Dan Wieden introduced me to the company the very first day, the whole intro, and she's a woman. And I was like, oh, Dan.
Everything was good until that.
Also self-evident.
Self-evident. And I went to him after and I said, that didn't feel good. And he said, well, you're gonna have to get used to it because you are the first one. And you're often the first one. And that is your extra burden. And so anyway, I don't know if that relates, but those are all feelings that I think we have around power and networking and authority.
Well, imagine when you're also the one that has the accent.
Yeah. I share that
Exactly.
with you, hermano.
Who is this guy? I cannot even understand what he says. But I think in my journey it was a little bit different because I never like felt self-conscious about the power thing necessarily, but I wasn't being as effective maybe because I didn't understand that to its full extent, and what it did change for me completely, and I tell you the other side of that is the constant belief that my power is in the service of others, and I don't mean that in a very altruistic way. I mean in everything that I do every day needs to be to move something forward for somebody, for the business, for this project, and I tell you, some of my colleagues in the management team, especially the kind of like the new ones that come, they most people, all of us in some way, more or less, we're running around with a lot of fear, just running our lives and our careers with fear of being fired, fear of failing, fear of like being told no, fear of being rejected, fear. So even when you say to somebody, no, listen, my job right now is like to make you successful with this thing. So whatever we decide today, people even look like, oh, does he really mean it, or maybe there's another motive there. Yeah. Maybe he's trying to kind of like get me to, kind of like using politics to coerce me and then drive his agenda. But then when they realize, oh no, actually he means it, it makes a huge difference. And I had, many, and I still, it's one of the things that I always, I don't think I learn enough. Because my wife tells me all the time, says, well, you get surprised when people disappoint you, because I kind of, to your point about giving the power away, that's the kind of like my first approach to deal with people. And then some people do shitty things to me, or whatever, or they don't hold to their end of the bargain, or whatever it is. So that's what it was more tough for me to figure out, because I'm also not a person that holds grudges. So even if I want to have revenge over somebody, I just can't get myself to act like that. Maybe too much information for you guys. But I think it's important, because I think the way then you use the politics as a neutral force, to your point, value, neutral value, the relationships and the trust, and then the networking. Is to me, everything changed when I put it in like, this is about serving, and the good will come even when people disappoint. Yep.
Agreed. The three of you not only have been amazing in your careers as marketers, as business people, the three of you have undertaken the task of leveraging your bully pulpit to actually do fundamental change in the industry and beyond. So this would be my last question. What drives you, and what are you doing? You want to start, Diego?
Well, yes, thank you. I think it's a very good question, because I ask myself that a lot. And for me, it starts like, if you are in a position of power, access, you have a big checkbook, you have to use it for the betterment of whatever is important to your organization, to you personally, or whatever it is. It is a responsibility, And I was struggling at the beginning of my career, because when I didn't have a lot of access, a lot of power, it's just like, okay, it's like, how do you get it started? And then when you are in that position, it's like I'm counting every hour of every day, because I say, well, in the moment that I don't have this anymore, that I don't have this access, this power, or this checkbook, I'm not probably going to have as much impact as I can have now. So every day counts, which drives me a lot and drives my teams, crazy. But I think you and I were discussing this before coming in here. I think what happens a lot in business in general is that everybody is looking for like the headline, the press release, and the announcement of the new program or whatever they're doing to, save another life, help another person, help diversity, whatever it is. So I think that our industry has been kind of like used to these things that are very flighty and just don't go anywhere. The biggest impact that we can make, and I think we all have done it in different ways, is the consistency and persistency. We've done this program now for 5 years. 200 people have, interns have gone through this program.
It's called Ad Fellows.
We have hired.
You just tell them really quickly what Ad Fellows is.
Well, this came out of a need that we saw that is like in the advertising and marketing industry that we all live in. Still, I go to most meetings, and there are no women, there are no people of color of any kind. But everybody is talking about it all the freaking time. And you and I talked about this point. It's like it drives us crazy, and with I'm a very impatient person overall. So in this one in particular, I'm very impatient because nobody is really doing anything about it. So, and the other belief that I have is that there are a lot of internship programs that are fantastic, but they don't address the principal problem that I think exists, which is it's an economical program. If you don't have your parents that can pay for you to be in a city like New York for 2 years, with an apartment, as small as it would be, in order for you to make it, you will never make it. So we created this program called Ad Fellows that basically is a 9-month rotation across 5 different jobs that you do in marketing and agencies, so you can figure out what you want to do. But then it's all expenses paid, and you get a salary. And we guarantee 95%, because obviously sometimes you don't get everybody that is great, 95% paid jobs coming out of that. We created a coalition. We have like 28 brands and agencies that are part of it. And the success is like being like a year. It started with 3, then we went to this, then we went to this, and after 5 years, now we are going to have 250 ad fellows every year that are going to be coming into the industry and be hired. You know, it's incredible. And hopefully we'll get to more. But we didn't start with 250. We started with 2.
And your CEO, going back full circle, your CEO supported that.
Yes, and even if he didn't support it, he still paid for it. But it's interesting because that's the other thing. It's like on anything, I believe it's like the first thing that you need to do is start.
Yep.
Yes.
You know, and now what happens is like, I have agencies that come and say, how can we join this? I can only afford one person. It doesn't matter.
Okay,
come. Here it is. You know, and people want to be part of the things that work, and everybody wants to make a difference. So if you can be a catalyst for that, oh my God, that's like
amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. So for me, the thing I think about is like the chances of me being up here talking to all of you are like negative 4,000%. Like, so, you know, or me being in the job that I have, like, you know, 20-something years ago, I left Ghana as a 17-year-old, came to the States with like $100 in a suitcase and did not go to the Ivies. So like, I'm super stoked to be here today, just walking around feeling the Ivy feel. But I tell that story to say the only reason that happened is because like doors were opened. Because I had access. Like I got a scholarship to go to McAllister College. When I got into this business, because I went to a minority job fair in Chicago and like met the guy who was recruiting for the Leo Burnett internship. That's how I went to Leo Burnett as my first job. So I take very seriously the responsibility that, like, to Diego's point, now that you have access, the only job, like I see my number one job is like using my job to like open more doors, right? So like up until the point when I don't have this job anymore, I'm going to leverage that checkbook to the absolute hilt. So, and that influence to the absolute hilt. So what that looks like is building an incredibly diverse marketing function. So my leadership team of 10 people, 70% women, 40% people of color, like that does not happen by accident. And everywhere else throughout the marketing organization, like I approve every hire down to, you know, the assistant account exec, I approve every hire, and the question I always ask is, did you have a diverse slate? And if you did not, I'm not signing off the hire, right? So like we're building in all of these mechanisms that are increasing the diversity of the team and then of the company broadly. We're also using the checkbook for things like the 2% pledge. We're one of the first businesses to like commit to spending, you know, more than that 2% on our media with our partners and supporting like Black and brown creators in the ecosystem. So the point is that like, if I'm in this job and I'm not doing that, like I'm failing. Like that for me in a lot of ways is the job. Yes, there's like the DoorDash marketing thing and all of that, but if I leave DoorDash and I have not built a more diverse team or I've not built a company that's more invested in issues around diversity and in issues around equality, I treat that as a failure.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, Kofi, I was going to say, I've always sort of believed I ended up where I was because of a cosmic tear in the universe, but I can't even say that after you know? Like so I think really, I mean, I think overcoming what drives me is independence. Overcame great poverty and a lack of a support system. And I turned that into this idea that I owed no one anything. And then I got older and saw that, like, yeah, it doesn't really get you much. But what it does get you is this idea that you will say what you think, that you won't let anyone co-opt your ideals or your words, that there is a strength in having gotten through and achieving. And when I landed at the top of Wieden Kennedy, and I say I landed like I had nothing to do with it. See, this is that thing. I was like, woo, like Genie. I dream of Genie, and there I was.
You earned it fair and square,
But that's-
hard fought and hard earned.
What we do. But I realized it was an independent company, that I had spent 11 years in a holding company. And so now there was this double down of actually I could get up every day and say whatever I really felt in my heart. And in repayment for the luck that I felt, I would use that to say things on behalf of everyone else that was fighting to pull themselves up and out. And I have been very fortunate that way. And sometimes I have fallen on my own sword and continued to do it. But you know, independence drives me. And I think that independence is a gift that you give to anyone who has felt underrepresented or undervalued, is to internalize their locus of control and drive. And so anything I do is about making people believe that it all comes from inside them. And I tried to do that at Wieden and continue to.
And continue to. What's remarkable about is that you guys have driven this within the context of the business strategy, within the context of the CEO priority, which is where we started, not as a CSR effort, but rather as an integral part of the business strategy because of the business case proven for made more diversity within the totality of the ecosystem. And the fact that you're leveraging the power to actually push that through is actually what I think is going to eventually change.
Antonio, people think when I talk about this, they think, oh, well, you're from Argentina, you're an immigrant, of course, you think, like, I said, like, listen, I think it's the right thing to do, first of all, but I'm absolutely 100% self-serving in this endeavor because my marketing team, and I think you referred to this, we need to speak to 300 million people in this country. And the only way that I'm going to be successful with the marketing that Verizon does is if I have people in my team that are going to understand the diversity that messages of beliefs, values, everything. Not that you'll be surprised, but it's still surprising to me because it's not the way I think. But I go to these meetings in which I hear people talking. Somebody that's not black trying to explain to a black person what it is to be black. And it's like
it's always a good time.
Exactly. No, but I'm saying you would think that some of these things would be like people would even like think about like that's not a good idea, or right, and it's just so we need the diversity. We need that diversity or mansplaining or like things like that that is still in this day and age happen. I don't think because most people, let's say, mean well. It's just like they don't know, So, so we need that diversity. And the more diverse people that are in the marketing teams, the better job we're going to do externally, and the more we're going to train everybody else to be more like that.
A very quick proof point to that, because Wieden was very insular culture. There was a lot of everyone, hours under your belt, hours under your belt, hours under your belt. Well, when you're trying to diversify an agency, hours under your belt is a really constricting and bad thing. And just to prove your point, I was able to pull statistics on which work we had done that had won the most awards and broken through the most in culture. And it was a very small group of people, all of them in the minority in the company, all of them people of color and women, usually both together. And that work had been the work that had gone through the roof. And it was like right in front of us.
What was the reaction when you shared that?
There was all kinds of like, nobody knew what to say because
awkward.
The whole way they'd gotten there was like their book. And there was a great Derek Jeter ad with the cap.
Yep.
And that was done by a receptionist and a junior producer, both women of color, who just loved the shit out of Derek Jeter. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we have
sorry.
7 minutes. Any questions from the audience?
You guys don't be shy.
Yes,
Yes.
unbelievable.
Not a question either, but another comment. First of all, thank you very much. And the one thing that really sticks out to me, and it kind of bridges both sides of the conversation, one is the relationship between the CMO and the CEO, as well as the broader relationship with people in the organization and then beyond it. And I think that the two words that really come to mind, it's empathy and it's transparency. I've had the privilege of being not a CEO, but a COO of a very small publicly traded company. And when the market, the CMO, I can remember my first, not day, but my first week, and the CMO came to me and said, look at what we're doing. And it was all about number of leads. It was all about awards. It had nothing at all to do with how we're reaching our customers and our prospects and moving them towards what we're all here about, which is, frankly, making money. And it's not that simple. If you don't take care of the people around you on both sides, internally as well as externally, you're not going to get there. So it's, I don't know, maybe I've been around long enough where it just seems obvious to me, but do what your mom wanted you to do. Just be right, listen to people, and react genuinely. So thank you for the pulpit.
It's a great point, and I tell you, in the management team at Verizon, we deal with that a lot because I think I don't know, maybe we are all trained to be so strong at what we do that we kind of like end up believing that the way we think about the world is the way, as opposed to say like, no. When we mean that we're all in this together, it means that we're in this together, and that generosity, respect, I don't know everything, are things that are important because it's not possible for anybody in any management team of any model company of the size of the companies that we work for that can absolutely know everything and have a grasp on every single issue. So there are points in which, no, you know what, because I know about brand, I tell you, you gotta trust me on this one. Now, this other shit that you say, I don't even know what you're talking about. I have no idea about how the cables to connect 5G actually work. So I gotta, I do, but anyway, I have to. No, but it's that trust, and I think it's a lot easier to say that, no, we're in this together, we need to trust each other, but then when the heat comes, and we all really need to like be in service of each other, it's difficult. And then to your point about learning the language, I learned a long time ago that it doesn't help you if you're in marketing to talk about the awards. But respect is the word that complements what you're saying, and I think I mean that not just one way, but in every way. So this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
I have a question around how you identify what problems to go after, because you talked about thinking beyond being a marketer to being a business person. And also, Diego, you mentioned the ROI, sort of the internal ROI of your time and your effort. How much of this is gut versus you actually thinking through the business case, if you will?
Well, I tell you what I do. It requires a lot of, for me at least, it requires a lot of discipline and process to actually be able to take the inputs every month or in every single moment, and then decide how I'm going to spend my time, what I'm going to prioritize, and how we're going to drive that in the organization. So for example, and I mention this sometimes when people ask me that question because that's what works for me, not that it works for everybody, but I do the budget of my time every month ahead based on the priorities that we have, how much time I'm going to spend on the big things. And what I do is I share that with all my leaders. So I said, like, here is the slide with how I'm spending my time this month. It helps them to prioritize, to say, like, don't come and talk to me about balloons because I'm not gonna talk about balloons. I'm going to talk about planes, and it kind of like works. But it feels sometimes like I need to constantly do it because again, priorities change all the time. And I think we didn't talk about this, but I tell you what I think the relationship between the CEO and the CMO breaks is the alignment of the priorities.
Absolutely.
Is not there. A little bit of like, well, why are you doing working on these things that nobody really cares, or it's gonna really move the needle. But when the alignment is like, and that's another piece of discipline that my boss always jokes at me because most people he needs to ask them like, what are you working? What are your priorities? I like to be in control of my own destiny. So I kind of like, these are the 6 things. And we have this ongoing joke, which is like, how many extra things at the end of my presentation he has to add to the list. And for the most part, I always win, meaning like are the same things that he had on his list. And that I think is super important to have that discipline,
The only other thing I'd add is like in terms of figuring out which business problems to focus on, part of it is sort of dependent by how your organization is run. So Antonio and I, and Diego, this may be true for you as well, have just worked in like intensely like data-driven environments, right? So at DoorDash, we run a weekly business review where we go through every key metric in the business. So that means that like on a week-to-week basis, you actually understand like what needs to happen, right? Like where are we behind and where do we want to go invest? Where are we leading and where do we want to double down? And also like when the environment changes, like we all lived through a global pandemic, as well as a social justice movement. Like when those moments happen, how's the business going to respond to it? Like what are you seeing in terms of what your different constituents and stakeholders are asking the business to do in this moment? And so letting sort of that data and that insight guide how we're going to invest and how we're going to spend our time.
Great, well, good point. No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.